There's 86,400 seconds every single day, and that's it, it's gone. Once it's gone, it's gone. And therefore, if you feel that you need to make a change, however big or however small, take action and do it. Because every day that goes by that you don't is a day that you're not really in your power, in your true authentic self. And that to me is a tragedy, because change can be really, really easy, and it can be really fast, and it lasts.
So we are live, and welcome to today's Trust Builders session. Really special guest with us today that I'm going to introduce in just a second. But before I do, I'd just like to introduce my co-host, Alex Genov. Alex, how are you?
Great. Always a pleasure to be with you and with the wonderful guests.
Well, without further ado, I would love to introduce our very special guest today. Amanda, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for taking time today. We're going to be focusing on building trust in yourself. We're speaking to customer experience and employee experience professionals who could impact the lives of millions of people across the world. So really privileged to have yourself. And not only are you an expert in this subject area, but you've published 2 books, which we're going to share in just a second. And your TED talk, which has garnished nearly 2 million views in terms of label-less living. And certainly someone who is from Northern Ireland, I can certainly understand that appreciation of diversity of thought and viewpoints, and understanding others as people is so important. And this experience of your expertise being born out of adversity, in that you have had to overcome a number of curveballs, as you described. So we're going to chat through that there. But you are a high achiever. You were an executive in Estee Lauder, focusing on education. And you also have coached CEOs, athletes, and high-pressured professionals. So I know you're joining us from Portugal. Alex is in Las Vegas. So you're very, very welcome, Amanda. We'd love you just to give a quick hello and a quick overview of your experience.
Hi, Chris. Alex, it's really, really great to spend time with you this afternoon. Yes, I'm calling in from Portugal, and we've got a beautiful weather here. And I'm just really excited to impart some of my wisdom that I've learned organically and naturally. I'm really happy to talk through some of the curveballs that have kind of come fast and furious in the last 10 years. And of course, it's called a curveball because we've got no idea it's going to hit us. And I would say in all my years of study and working in human development, it's only really when those curveballs started to hit that I really started to grow and learn. So I learned some, if I kind of call them mind hacks, how to think differently when adversity presents itself, and how to learn and grow from that opportunity. So I can be excited really to share that whoever's listening, I guarantee that you'll use at least one of these simple mind hacks, probably before you lay your head on the pillow tonight, depending where you are in the world, obviously. But if you're going to have an hour before you go to bed, you're probably going to use one of them. So they are practical, really easy to apply, and for me, pretty life-changing.
That's wonderful. And I have to comment on the wonderful picture behind you. An ode to our own superpowers, no doubt, in terms of that lovely picture behind. So I suppose just a framing question. We're talking about limiting beliefs and also resilience. You talked about the curveballs and bounce back. We'd love just our audience just to hear a bit of your background and some of the context of how you got to where you are now.
Sure. I mean, I've always been really interested in human development, and my journey with Estee Lauder started literally at the grassroots, on the counter, selling lipsticks in Rackham's Bradford. You know, sort of cut my teeth as being a sales girl. And anyone that has ever worked in the cosmetic industry will know that it's pretty ruthless and it's very target driven. And Estee Lauder was then, and probably still is, one of the leading houses in that field. And so I learned very quickly. The time on the counter was great, but I really wanted to get into the management side of it. And I had a wonderful 16 years with them, mainly customer service focused with sales behind it, because I have a similar ethos to Alex in that it's about looking after people and finding solutions to their problems. And if your product manages to do that, happy days, you know. So life was really cruisy. Really cruisy. I wrote my first book. The only thing I'd really experienced was a divorce, it was amicable, and I'm still friends with my ex-husband to this day. And then all of a sudden, fast and furiously, these curveballs just hit one after another. And the first one came off the back of cycling from Land's End to John O'Groats. So I've done some crazy things like run across Portugal, and that's 7 marathons in 7 days.
Brilliant.
From one end, of the Spanish River, got the Guadiana, right to the end of Portugal, and we raised $65,000 for charity, for children's charities. And it's a bit of a crazy thing to do when you're 42 years of age and you've never like that before. So this momentum of raising money and doing crazy events, extreme events, led me to do Land's End to John O'Groats. And I was having a bit of a laugh with one of the organisers that I was doing it with. And I was like, well, if we're going to cycle the length, we might as well climb the height as a joke. So we actually ended up, climbing the Snowdon, Scafell Pike and Ben Nevis, as well as cycling. So when I got to the end of it, I was like, I'm as fit as a fiddle. Like, I'm firing on all cylinders. And I got an aeroplane back to New Zealand, which is where I was spending a lot of my time, and just did a routine health check. And it transpired there was a tumour in my left kidney the size of a golf ball. And it was like, I said, well, I'm sure I'm sure it's benign. I was, looking at it very positively, and it transpired it wasn't, and it needed to come out very quickly. So the surgery was done. I now have a little dinosaur tattoo where the kidney used to be a little T-Rex, because it's extinct, right? You don't need 2 kidneys actually to survive. So that kidney's extinct. So I've celebrated that with a little T. And my husband, was so supportive, shocked, but yet was the one that championed doing these crazy events and was a big support to me. And if somebody had have tapped me on the shoulder in Christchurch, New Zealand, the day that I woke up from surgery and said, a year tomorrow, your husband will die, I'd have gone, you've got the wrong person. Like, angel from the future, you're talking about the wrong guy. Like, he's healthy. But literally a year and a day later, Keith died, which was pretty sudden. And that curveball was probably the one that I grew from the most, because when I had my kidney out, I was like, in 4 months' time, I'm going to be running a marathon, which is what I did very slowly. But I made myself a promise that that's what I was going to do. And that was my line in the sand and saying goodbye to the C word. And then, obviously this happens out of my control. There's nothing I can do about it. I couldn't help Keith with his thought processes because his were his. And when he passed away, it was a curveball that I learned from in a different way, because what I did was I allowed myself to climb into my grey bubble and kind of just switch everything off, be small, and have some time with me. So I wasn't client facing. I stopped writing. I stopped running. Probably drank a little bit too much Pinot Noir, if I'm honest, because the Pinot Noir in New Zealand's bloody good. And I had enough knowledge to kind of go, if I stay stuck here, it's going to be really hard to get out of this bubble. And so it was that awakening of life's happening for me, not to me. And whilst I can be in victim mentality, that's not going to be helpful. So I started to curate my life, and it started really just running around the lake with my good mate, Vicky. And she kind of stopped in her tracks and she was like, Amanda, look at your life. Like, one half of the canvas is rich and textured, and it's this beautiful oil painting. And that's from birth until the point that Keith passed away. And the other half of it is completely bare. This canvas is for you to do whatever you want on it. And so I started to think, I want to fall in love again. I want to go to Burning Man. I've never experienced that, not too far away from you, Alex. I wanted to start running again, writing again, and helping people again. So it was a pretty fast track onto that. And I did fall in love again. And for somebody that had been like with a hot fireman for 10 years, married for 5 years and an amicable divorce, and then with Keith for 19 years and then lost him, you'd kind of think I'd fall in love with a man.
Yes.
But I didn't. I fell in love with a woman. And, this was a big shock for me. But you can imagine my family. I mean, my own mum even said to me, love, you're not gay, you're grieving.
Right.
Give yourself some time. It's a phase you're going through.
Yeah.
But I knew myself well enough to know that even though these mind viruses, as I call them, were being given to me, they didn't suit my truth.
Mhm.
And so Sarah and I have been together 10 years. We have 5-year-old twin boys, and we live here in Portugal. We did go back and forth to New Zealand and the Algarve in Portugal, but COVID kind of sorted that out for us. But even then, everything's looking great. Everything's looking rosy. Literally a month before we were due to get married, we lost Sarah's mum tragically in a shark incident. She was attacked and killed by a great white shark just off. She was diving, and that's a month before we're due to get married. Wedding dresses are bought, everything's organised, and I said to Sarah, we don't have to go ahead with this. We can just bring everyone together and have a lovely family celebration. And she was like, hell no, my mum would kill me if I went through with it. So, and it's not to say that we weren't angry, that we weren't grieving, that we weren't confused as to why this is happening. But what we'd learned together really was that you have a choice. You either, think it's happened to you or it's happening for you. And I just think that very simple mindset changes how you then navigate that curveball. And the path that you go on is a very different trajectory.
And I think that's one of our first key takeaways, right? This idea of, the experience is something that, happens as opposed to you're in control of that input. And Alex, that I think that's something you'd agree with and concur in a broader context. Maybe you could reflect on that as a linking point.
Oh, this is such a profound stories, Amanda. Thank you so much. Thanks for opening up and sharing this. But I agree. It's this the victim mentality versus keeping a positive outlook. I mean, I can't say that. I mean, I agree. Life is all ups and downs. It's not up, right? This doesn't exist, and I have not experienced personally these such tragedies that you've gone through. But I do believe, on a personal level, I'm a big fan and practitioner of Shaolin Kung Fu, and I'm not a Buddhist myself, but I like this mindset of it's the yin and yang. It's always one follows the other. And once you accept that, right, then I think it's easier to take things as they come.
Superb. And I think, that point of life happens for you, not to you mindset, and this idea of reframing in adversity. I think, Amanda, if you can maybe just take us then naturally to that point of the role of self-awareness and then some of the practical tools we talked about, the delete button, maybe you could talk us through that as a practical strategy for that self-awareness.
Sure. I'd actually been reading a book called Virus of the Mind by Richard Brody, and it's really for marketeers. However, from a psychological perspective, I found it really interesting that, there's so much goes on underneath the radar and gets underneath our radars that we're unaware of. And for anyone that is managing a team, anyone that's a parent, anyone that has any significant relationship with another human being, which is pretty much all of us, we are influencing all the time. And how we influence will affect other people, whether that's a positive or negative influence. And I started to become mindful of this myself in terms of just being aware of what am I allowing into my neurology. So I'll give you a perfect example of that. I was an avid newsreader. When I traveled for Lauda, I would read the Financial Times. I would read all the newspapers. I flew a lot. My territory was Europe, Middle East, and Africa. In the airports, I would just consume what was happening in the news. And then 9/11 happened, and my brother was in Manhattan at the time. And when he eventually got a line out and we realized he was safe and he was with some friends, he would ring home to find out what was going on because the news was different. And then I had this epiphany of, oh my God, that's not real. And so even that was a channel that I closed down. And so, I have a selective way that I find out what's going on that I feel is more a version of reality. So I became mindful of what I'm allowing into my neurology. And then quite by accident, really by accident, I was in hospital just recovering from the kidney coming out. So this is 11 years ago in Christchurch, New Zealand. And an acquaintance came to see me. I think she'd been playing golf in Christchurch, and I think I'd probably played 2 rounds of golf with her, and that's how I knew her. And it was very kind of her, she came with a bottle of Pinot Noir and some chocolates, and she started chatting away about, how was I doing? And you get tired quite quickly when you've had a massive surgery, which, was a bit of a shock to me. And I think she kind of ran out of things to say. And then all of a sudden she mentioned she'd watched this documentary about this woman that had donated a kidney. And I'm thinking, oh, this is an interesting story. And she said, yeah, Amanda, it was amazing. And she donated this kidney to somebody that really needed it. And the transplant went really well. And the person's body received the kidney. And then 4 months later, she slumped into a deep depression because the research says that when the body loses an organ, it can become really depressed. And I'm kind of going, at what level serve me? And so not me, but my unconscious mind, the powerhouse of me, developed this big delete button. And it was literally like this big red delete button, and across it in white was the word delete. And I talk about this a lot now. In fact, in the TED talk, I talk about it. And I encourage, when I'm doing a keynote, people can say whatever they want in white, right? It doesn't have to be delete, but mine was delete. And as she's talking to me, inside my head, really loud, it kind of went like this: delete, delete, delete. And it was me actively, consciously deleting the mind virus that she was imparting to me. I was bringing it into conscious awareness, not accepting it, and in many respects, deflecting it. So I waited until she finished her little narrative, having deleted it. And then just naturally, like in the film Up, the movie Up, there's this dog, and every time he sees a squirrel, he goes, squirrel, like he's easily distracted. It's a bit like your phone sat there and all of a sudden it vibrates and you're easily distracted. I threw a squirrel card and I just said, anyway, that was interesting, but how's your golf? And you asked the golfer about the golf. Oh my God, so you kind of need, if you're going to use the delete button, you kind of need a squirrel card in your back pocket. And that might be Trump. It might be, what's happening with Harry and Meghan, whatever's current at the moment that somebody will have an opinion about, so that they don't go back into the narrative that you've just deleted.
Yes.
I found that was so useful. Just the self-awareness of, this is not helpful to my neurology, and at no level can I accept this as being a possible truth, because it will house a part of my neurology, set up a neural network, and then I'll start to own it, which means it possibly could come true. So that's kind of how the delete button was developed, and that's 11 years ago. And I speak about that tool a lot, and it's probably the tool that people just grasp really easily, and probably the one people will use before they go to bed tonight. It's important to perhaps mention that it's good not to tell the person you've just deleted what they've told you, just to keep the relationship intact. But it's just, I could have, people have also questioned me like, Amanda, why didn't you just enter into, this is not helpful to me? And I just didn't want to spend any time on it. I don't think she necessarily, it would have made her feel embarrassed. She probably was thinking, as she was telling me the story, why am I even talking about this? So it was just a helpful way of not allowing it to come in and changing the subject to something different.
And I think this naturally allows us to then have that awareness then of these self-limiting beliefs. Could you maybe just take us through what are limiting beliefs, and then how are they holding us back, and then some of the approaches that we can use to start having that awareness, as you said, choose to delete or some other way of allowing yourself to kind of, rise above the thought and the belief?
Well, the whole thing about limiting beliefs is a fascinating subject, and it's something that I've really been studying since 2005. And I would say it's my real area of expertise, so much so that my second book's all about that. It's purely about belief change and uncovering what limiting beliefs are. So first of all, I think the useful thing to say is that example I just gave you, when the delete button was developed by my unconscious, was to delete somebody else's mind virus. But actually, it's really useful to delete your own mind viruses. So negative self-talk that can take up a narrative and create a spiral. Just that awareness of this is not helpful, and delete it, stop it in its tracks, will cause what we call a change in behavior. It's a pattern interrupt from the norm. Whereas if you don't stop it. It will just do its normal thing and you'll have the general outcome that the person generally gets, which if it's a negative mind virus narrative, then the person will end up feeling bad. So first of all, even to use the delete button on your own narrative is helpful. And the first thing I'd encourage people to do is just imagine, what does your delete button look like? Just practice that. And if you're out on a run or you're doing some exercise and you're negotiating with yourself, should I go, shouldn't I go? And there's this whole narrative. It's just delete the narratives that's not serving. So that's kind of the takeoff point. And when we look at limiting beliefs, a lot of people might know it's imposter syndrome. So it's kind of termed as that phrase. The way I see imposter syndrome really is a symptom of a core limiting belief. So it's kind of like I'm faking it. You know, if people really knew what I was like, I'm going to get found out. It's that kind of thing. But really, that's born of a core limiting belief that's running very deep inside the unconscious, that has been programmed before the age of 7. So there's a chap called Dr. Bruce Lipton that's written a great book called The Biology of Belief that really looks at belief systems from a scientific perspective. So this is all programming from our environment before the age of 7, when there's no conscious mind, there's no gatekeepers there going, I don't accept that. And, you know, I've got 2 5-year-olds, and Chris and you were talking about this the other day. They're bilingual. You know, they go to a full-blown Portuguese school. They are fluent in Portuguese in 2 years. I've lived in Portugal since 1999. And I've got restaurant Portuguese, and that's about as so they are learning machines, and the fact that they absorb everything allows them to learn so effortlessly.
Yes.
So it's a real gem, but equally it can be a double-edged sword because we can't control these mind viruses. So for people that are watching, listening to this, my question is, what is it at your very core that you truly believe about yourself? That may be holding you back? And most people can generally name some essence of it, but that's generally a symptom, and it's generally higher up. So if you can name it, it's not it, because it works out of conscious awareness. So if anyone's driving or, you know, I don't know, operating any kind of machinery while they're joining us here, don't do this exercise. But I'll give you an example of what I mean. If you just kind of put your hands down by your side and give them a shake. So put any pens down, coffee down, just give your arms a shake. And now just cross your arms, just fold them like you normally fold them. Super easy, right? Yeah, didn't even have to think about it. Now unfold them, give them a good shake again, and now fold them the opposite way around. A little bit trickier. And the reason that's trickier is because, Chris, you have a program for how you fold your arms. You just didn't know you had a program. You have a program for pretty much 95% of everything you do on a daily basis. And the moment I ask you to fold your arms in the opposite direction, you're now bringing it into conscious awareness. So the limiting belief is housed within the unconscious. It's served at lots of different levels, generally as a protection mechanism. And what essentially that self-awareness does is it starts to flush it out and bring that person into conscious awareness of what's going on for them.
Yeah, and what I thought was really interesting about this is some of the techniques we talked about, the detective, being able to source those. So people listening are going, okay, well, how do I go to that level deeper? And you talked about the Sherlock Holmes technique. I'm seeing the parallels, Alex, here in terms of customer experience, the labeling of an experience, the root cause analysis needed to do that. But it'd be amazing, Amanda, just to talk to us about some of the techniques people can adopt to get to that root cause analysis, to really understand that unconscious or subconscious belief that is underpinning these labels or self-limiting beliefs.
Yeah, sure. So this was another thing that was just developed quite organically. I was working in my practice in New Zealand, where in the days when people used to physically come, you know, they would drive, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours to come and see me. New Zealand's a big country, even though there's only 5 million.
Yes.
And, you know, they might drive 2.5 hours to come, and they'd come into the office, beautiful environment. I'd be working with them, and I would just wanted to make sure we got as much out of that time together. And there was one particular client I was working with, and she was like, no, that's it, Amanda. It's definitely that, I'm not lovable. It's definitely that I'm not lovable. And I was like, it's not, because there's no visceral connection to that. You're not I'm not seeing the visceral connection. You're not feeling the pain, and this will be painful. You've kind of told yourself this so many times. It's either become numb or there's something else going on. Let's play a game. So the Sherlock Holmes was developed, and I sent her away to do this process for 48 hours. So it's a useful thing to do for 48 hours, not for any longer, because A, it'll get pretty exhausting.
Yes.
And B, I think the quality of the material and the feedback will probably start to be diluted. So essentially what you do is you become your own Sherlock Holmes with your own magnifying glass, and you eavesdrop on your internal dialogue. And anything that's negative, it's helpful if you can actually physically move yourself away from the space where you were sat. So you're not sat in it. So if I was on my computer here and I was, doing some emails and I had a negative spiral of dialogue, I would actually stand up, move myself away. That's the pattern interrupt. That's the break. I'm going to do something different. And the question I ask is, what is it that I, pointing at me that sat at the computer, truly believe about myself that caused me to think that? Starts to do it. It's an intelligent question that will get an intelligent response. And so the person will get some feedback from that. There'll be other words, and it might not even make sense. There might be juvenile words. One client I was working with, highly decorated lawyer, came up with geek. I'm a geek. And actually, that was something that was programmed when she was 5, when the glasses she wore were stuck together with tape and she didn't get picked to play. So it was a juvenile word. So there needs to be a level of curiosity and kind of childlike curiosity and playfulness with the Sherlock Holmes. If it becomes too serious, the person can become too analytical and stop the process. So it's kind of like a little bit pantomime. What is it that Amanda there believes about herself that caused her to think that? And it just allows us to get further down, to chunk further down into what's really going on. Yes. And in most cases, well, I would say most cases, probably around 55% of cases, when I reconnect with that client, we're pretty much there. There might be just some word code that needs to change so it really fits their description. But essentially, they're starting to nail it. And it's things like, I'm a mistake, I should never have been born. I mean, it's really core, horrible things that they were unaware of. Now, some people might be going, well, how is that helpful, Amanda? I think the awareness and the relief of, oh my God, well, that makes sense then. It's like somebody with a traveled school through, I don't know, being dyslexic, for example. When they get that diagnosis, everything makes sense to them. Yeah. Kind of, oh, well, that makes sense as to why that felt different for me. So in most cases, as a sigh of relief, things start to fall in place, and now I can do something about it. So it's not that the person's just left, that it means then we know what we're dealing with, and now we can change that.
I love that you're providing these really accessible ways to think through these. And of course, you've conducted research on entrepreneurs. Could you maybe just talk us through that research just to reinforce, you're providing accessible tools, but actually you've conducted research to think about this idea of self-limiting beliefs?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was keynote speaking at a conference in the UK just before, around about a year ago. And I spoke about limiting beliefs. So the term I used was imposter syndrome, because everyone kind of gets that. And there were about 300 people in the room, and I could see that the audience were engaging. I could see that pennies were dropping, that the content was relevant to them, just the feedback. But when it came to Q&A, I really expected some meaty questions, and there just wasn't that. And yeah, I stayed for dinner. So I was hanging around. I did a book signing. I was there the whole evening. And the number of people that came up, and literally, it was like behind a whispered hand, can I have a chat with you? And it's like, oh my God, it's like you were speaking to me directly, Amanda. And so I decided to do some interviews with entrepreneurs around the unspoken truth. What is the biggest unspoken truth that is holding you back? And interestingly, the first one was loneliness. That was the number one for an entrepreneur, manager, anyone that's, successful in a corporate setting is the loneliness of that. And secondly, it was imposter syndrome. It was, if people really knew what I was like, they wouldn't have trusted me with this role. If people really knew what I was like, they wouldn't have invested. So that's a massive amount of energy that individual has to put into faking it till they make it. Whereas all that energy, if the belief systems change, can just go into being fully and truly them in an authentic and organic way. So on the interviews were all the same. It didn't matter, male, female, didn't matter what age, and the interviews were done all over the world in terms of connecting with people. And there were obviously other discussions that we had, but I then developed a program, if you like, called Beyond Brilliance, which helps entrepreneurs, executives to get past the trying to reach the goal and really address them and themselves, so that doesn't matter what they achieve, there's brilliance anyway, because they are brilliant. They've just lost the contact and connection with that, and chasing the goal too much and trying to elude themselves that they are better than they are, but than they feel they are, but they are anyway. It's kind of a paradox, frustrating paradox.
Yes, I think that allows us now to naturally, I suppose, take a step back and think about how you can use this recoding to not only empower yourself, but to empower teams. And I'd maybe like to bring in Alex here in terms of some questions, or, I would maybe just use the real world impact. We talked about natural coding in schools, and I would love that to be a really nice springboard for Alex to have a reflection about how we build or bring our full self to work, but also think about building leadership and trust in organizations. So we'd love to get that reflection about, how that awareness can bring self-discovery, but also impact a broader audience as well.
No, this is a fascinating discussion, Amanda. This is great, and I've been, thinking a lot about. Just want to go back to the imposter syndrome, and in the context of business, right? Isn't there a flip side to that? I mean, we know that there's a lot of has been written about really poor management, right? A lot of managers are really poor managers. So, what about the flip side of this? Imposter people who what is that syndrome called, that are given the opportunity and they don't have the abilities or the constitution to be people leaders, but they take it and I would say, fake it till they break it, right? I mean, they make their own career, they move up, and it's in a context where results are not. It's not like the Olympics, right? In the Olympics, you can see, right? You can see who can, over there it's or music arts, right? But in the business context where, right, you have, all these changes are, there's a lot of politics, a lot of that. So how do you address that where somebody has too much confidence and then they really impact people's lives, the business bottom line negatively?
Yeah, so the question is, you've got the opposite of imposter syndrome, where it's kind of like champion syndrome, like I've got everything I need, and there's an overconfidence in that space, which creates bad management just because of the very nature of who the person is. I think in many respects, it is, even though it's the opposite end of the spectrum, it's still the same problem, and therefore it's a positive imposter syndrome in many respects, because they're displaying all the traits that we associate with somebody that's successful, and yet actually that's only born from the fact that they're operating a limiting belief. So there's the over amplification to be successful. Whereas I think if you've got somebody that's quietly confident, that's got real total self-belief, champions people on, and their success naturally becomes a joint success. And we know those are the characters and traits of people that we enjoy working with and that bring a team along. That is born of just that self-assuredness, that I don't need to put anybody down. I don't need to amplify myself. I can just be and bring out the best in others, people first, champion them. Everybody's doing the best they can with the tools they've got right now. So how do I help that person? I think it's an really interesting question, because I think on the surface it looks as though it's the opposite, but really it's born from the same place of operating a limiting belief. It's just that they've learned how to deal with it, perhaps on the surface more effectively, but in the end, it's still going to bite them. Because as a team, there's going to start to be some fractures in that team, because it's them, not the team. Yeah. Interesting.
Super. And I would love to maybe, how that belief transformation can change lives at scale. And maybe you could reflect on, one of your clients who had that self-awareness to then make a change, and the example of how that impacted the lives of young children in schools. Maybe you'd reflect on that.
Yeah, it's interesting, because being completely transparent, I've got a little sister that's 10 years younger than me, and she's a teacher, born and bred, wanted to be a teacher, primary school teacher from the age of 7. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. 3 children of her own, and so that's what she did. She became a teacher and of little ones in Kent, and she noticed that she could only impact from a teaching perspective. She could see some of these children coming in with troubles. Things were going on at home. Perhaps they hadn't eaten breakfast. They were hungry, and there was nothing she could do in the capacity she was in. So she asked the head if the school would pay for her to come on one of my courses when it all used to be live. It's online now, but when it used to be live, and I was running one in London. So she came, and she was a student and played full out. And after the course, she just said, I need to resign. I have to change my career, and I have to work with children. So for a while, she became a kids and teens coach, running her own business. But the forward-thinking school reapproached her, the head, a lady called Ruth, who's now retired, reapproached Rebecca and said, we want to employ you to come in as a neural coder and work with our children. Historically, we've used different modalities that are government funded, but now we're prepared to throw some budget and we'll just put you on trial for 6 months and see how it works. Well, that was 4 years ago. And she's now working with 3 schools, and she's working with a senior school. So, that's from 11 up to 18, and then the primary schools. And actually the gold is in the primary, because if you can get them young, brilliant. By the time they're 15, 16, 17, 18, you're kind of trying to find a solution as opposed to prevent that. And interestingly, those schools have severed all the other modalities, because from a budget perspective, she's getting results quicker, the kids are getting signed off faster, and it's for longevity. So we are, one of the things we say is we help an individual to create unthinkable change. And the reason it's unthinkable is because whilst they're stuck in the problem, it's out of conscious awareness of what they can actually achieve. And I think there's this mind virus, this myth that change takes a long time, that you have to see somebody for months on end, that you have to be medicated, that I can't change, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And it's not true at all, because we've seen it in all the years that I've been working with people, and certainly the schools that Rebecca's working with. It's like, why would we change this? This is working. And kids, and it's a great fun way to actually be in that space, because they're learning about themselves. And in many respects, it's not content driven. So not context driven. So they're not having to climb into the problem, be associated into it, and keep stuck in that problem.
That's really amazing. And I think, we've covered, just to summarize, this idea of creating that self-awareness. You've given us some really practical tools, that delete button, and also the concept of a mind virus, where you can stop, take a step back, think about the pattern interruption. We also talked about neural coding. And I think you're making some suggestions around how maybe people could, look at resources to explore that a bit further. The other part is where you don't accept these self-limiting beliefs. You have new self-awareness. What about this new reality that you can create? How do we define that viewpoint of the world and how we make sense of it? Could you maybe talk it through? You've done your detective work, you've got your auto delete on speed dial, and you're making progress. Well, how do we then reimagine an experience that we want to live through in this new outcome we've created for ourselves?
I think this is a fascinating subject, and I think it's true to say that everyone's doing this anyway. They just don't realize they're doing it. And so if we think about somebody that has anxiety in their life, they create the anxiety, not necessarily realizing that they're doing that, because what they're doing is going out into the future, imagining it going wrong, and it feels real on the system now, and that creates the anxiety in the now. So whenever we are thinking about our future, we are creating what I call a future memory. So it's a memory, but it's not happened yet. And so I think one of the first things that's exciting for people to do, and it's one of the things I did when I had that analogy of the blank canvas, is, in 15 years' time, what do I want my future memory to be like? Is there going to be love in it? Have I got a nurturing, loving, supportive partner? Have I got any family? And I was 47 when my husband passed away. So the chances of having my own children were pretty non-existent, especially with no kidney. And yet it was like, well, I could adopt or I could foster, so I did have that in my future memory. I had a family with a dog living in the sunshine. So you can get really creative, and it's not, well, how am I going to do that? It's what would I like? In that time span, what would I like? Now, there's still some stuff you've got to do. I'm not talking about the secret. It's about the reality is people are doing this anyway. It's just that they're not necessarily creating future memories that are compelling, that create any change. And it can be a little woe is me. And I hear clients say it all the time, I've been like this for years and I just don't know how I'm going to change. It's just going to get worse. Well, they've been creating those future memories without them even realizing they're doing it. So bring it into conscious awareness, decide what elements those are, and rehearse it. Like, create a movie, have a soundtrack. What's your internal dialogue? Are you going to be, drinking a glass of champagne? Can you taste something? Bring in all the senses, which is effectively the language of our brains. And then you've got to do some stuff. But I think if we're very clear about what that future memory is, then we've communicated that clearly to our unconscious, or as you called it, subconscious mind. So the genie, the powerhouse that operates 95% of our daily behavior on autopilot, now has a very clear idea of what that future memory is going to be. And this is actually a tool that we teach somebody that runs anxiety. We literally get them to change the movie, change the soundtrack, change the internal dialogue, and it changes the outcome. And interestingly, I had a journalist in New Zealand that came to me and she said, I've been told about you. If you can get me over my anxiety around having my blood pressure done, I'll do a free article about you in the magazine, in the Queenstown magazine. I was like, you're in, let's do it. So literally the writing was on the wall because she was having a blood pressure done the next day.
Oh, class.
And we just changed the movie. We changed the movie, we changed the soundtrack, we changed the internal dialogue, and it changed the outcome. And needless to say, I got a full page spread in the Queenstown magazine, which was great. And she became a good friend, and we play golf together. So it's not a tool that's only specifically used for anxiety. It's a tool and because so much has been written about, people might call it positive visualization. It's not. Visualization's only sight. This is a fully sensory experience with a movie. And actually, as I said, people do this naturally anyway. They just don't realize they do that.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that when we think about experience, we know that we're encoding emotion because we use emotion for recall. And in the business world, we tend to focus on the negative rather than the positives. So I really love that idea of designing your future state and bringing all the experiential elements in there. We're coming up to time, so I would love to unpack some kind of things that people could do in the next hour, in the next 24 hours, next week, next month. Try to pack as many takeaways as possible. And then we've got a wonderful offer we're going to extend to everyone as part of the concluding comments. So maybe just, I suppose, in summing up, resilience is key. Your belief system can reshape your reality. Mind viruses are everywhere. Natural coding, we've just heard, or neural coding, we've just heard, is a game changer. And trust starts with that self-awareness. I would love even just for you to sum up, any key points there, and also any exercises that people could bring into their daily lives?
Yeah, great. I think one of the first things that is really usable is when something happens that we don't expect to happen. It's out of our control and we don't like it. Literally stop yourself from doing perhaps what you would have done in the past, which is, why the hell has this happened? And go into solution mode, is to just stop and go, okay, what else could this mean? So it is, in many respects, it's like saying, this has been sent to me for a reason. I can learn from this, as opposed to, why is this happened to me? So this is going back to that, life's happening for me, not to me. And that was something that was really, really helpful for me with these curveballs.
Yeah.
And if it's something like loss or death, we lost Keith, we lost Sarah's mum. So tragically, there's a time and a place when you can get to that mindset. Initially, you need to go through your grieving process, whatever that is. But there comes a time when it's going, okay, what else can this mean? What can I learn from this? I don't like it. There's nothing I can do about it. But how can I grow and what else can it mean? I think that's the first piece. I think the second piece is this idea around that delete button, like just bring it out, keep practicing it. And more importantly, as I said earlier, Chris, the example I used was when somebody else gave me a mind virus.
Yes.
But equally, catch yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yourself and delete that. And if you want to, then step into Sherlock Holmes. That actually segues beautifully with that. Well, let's just reflect on this. What does that mean? Like, what is it I truly believe about myself that caused me to think that? And start to become curious about what that can mean as well. And I think the biggest lesson is, be your own observer. So whilst you're observing, observe what comes up and be quite, like, as you use that term, childlike curiosity, be curious about what this can mean. Because the subconscious part of us is still quite juvenile. It loves fun. It loves metaphors. It loves stories. This is why people, love listening to a podcast where the person being interviewed is telling stories, because it's in our DNA. We kind of grew up with that, and we have done for thousands of years in caves. So I think the curiosity and the childlike and the lightness then creates more learning, as opposed to getting heavy and intense and, foveal vision and becoming really upset about it. All that's going to do is go back into victim mode.
Of course. And I really like the parallels that people can apply at an individual level, but also in a work setting. If I'm head of employee experience, I can use that same approach, awareness, go into detective mode. What are the things we're going to delete? What's the future experience look like? And similarly in customer experience. Alex, I just invite you to share your reflections, and then I'll very kindly share the offer that we're going to be sharing with our listeners.
Thank you, Chris. No, Amanda, these are great life lessons and great techniques. As a social psychologist myself, it really resonates with me, and I really enjoyed the conversation and listening to your lessons.
Thank you.
Just to sum up before we go into a quick final word from Amanda, we have a really compelling offer for all of our listeners. This is the research diagnostic tool that Amanda talked about with her research. It's the coding report for entrepreneurs. It's focused on 4 pillars of resilience, drive, focus, and composure. And you can get your free assessment, which is absolutely wonderful. All you have to do is take out your phone and scan this QR code. Who knew they were a thing? They suddenly made a comeback after COVID. And you can also access it with adoreboard.com/1234, just to keep it super, super simple. We're also going to make that available on the Trust Builders LinkedIn page, and it'll be promoted in the comments as we share the videos as well. So, Amanda, all I have to do is to thank you for being such a wonderful guest. I'm sure every time you share your stories, you're inviting people into your life with that humility and composure, and obviously vulnerability to really draw out the lessons that we're taking away here, which are so valuable as us as individuals, but also, as we've heard, it can impact the lives of many others. So I'd like you just a final word and we'll wrap up there.
Thank you so much. I think my final word, having had a disease that could have taken my life and then losing somebody that I've been with for such a long time, and he did lose his life, is, and it sounds so cliche, but there's 86,400 seconds every single day, and that's it, it's gone. Once it's gone, it's gone. And therefore, if you feel that you need to make a change, however big or however small, take action and do it. Because every day that goes by that you don't is a day that you're not really in your power, in your true authentic self. And that to me is a tragedy, because change can be really, really easy, and it can be really fast, and it lasts.
What a wonderful imparting wisdom. Thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Trust Builders. Amanda, you've been a wonderful presenter and guest. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Alex.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.